Hey everyone, Professor Long here. Welcome to my lectures in anatomy and physiology. If you're watching these videos, it's for two reasons. One, you're enrolled in my class at Del Mar College, my Human Anatomy and Physiology 1 course, or two, you stumbled across these over the internet. If you're in my class, great, follow along. If you're not, please know that we're presenting the information the way that we want our students to learn it here at Del Mar College. Your instructors may do this differently. Now this is the laboratory component of the course. If you're in my class, you should be using what I call the list of things to know, or the laboratory guide. Sometimes they're a different color, but they have this little figure of a human being here. And if you go through it, it's going to tell you which structures you're responsible for when you take an exam. So there's going to be 4 lab tests, and each of the 4 lab tests will cover a certain set of material. This first lab test is somewhat of an introduction to anatomy and physiology for our students. And so I'm going to be starting on page 4, going over some rather simple concepts, but to many students, it's a totally new thing. So bear with me if you find this a little easy and you have a strong background in some anatomy and physiology and biology, great. If you don't, you may find this information starting to go pretty quickly. So make sure you watch the videos, you watch them over and over and over again, and prepare for exams. Now, what you see is a series of models before you here. And these models represent what we call the levels of organization. Our list of things to know on page 4 talks about lab activity 1, the organization of the body, and it discusses 6 levels of organization. I always include a 7th because I think it's equally important. And in lecture, we'll ask you questions about the functions of each level of organization, or what comprises them, I should say, if you've been following the lecture videos. This particular video is only for lab. And so all I'm going to ask you is to identify what level of organization is represented by each model. For example, this first model here represents the chemical or the molecular level of organization. So if you saw this model on an exam, we might ask a simple question like, please identify the level of organization represented by this model. Sometimes we have a molecule of DNA, sometimes we have all of these protein molecules that you will later learn what they are. So all that you need to know at this point is that this is the chemical or molecular level of organization. If we ask it on a lab test and you write chemical level, that would be correct. If someone else wrote molecular level, that would also be correct. Now, chemicals and molecules come together to form smaller structures called organelles. Larger structures called organelles. Organelles come together to form cells. And so this model represents 2 levels of organization combined. The entire model here represents a cell, a typical human cell. But all the small brightly colored structures in here, all the reds and blues and oranges and things, represent the organelles within the cell. So if I were to ask you on a lab test, please identify the level of organization represented by the orange thing, or the round blue thing, or the red thing, you would simply say organelle level. That's it. Later on, we'll learn which organelles are which when we study the cell. The entire model, if I ask you what level of organization is represented by this entire model, you would say the cellular level. Okay? This model represents the tissue level, and we're simply going in order of the list of things to know. This model shows you a group of cells working together. This is actually some muscle tissue. You may not know that yet, but you will eventually. But this model simply represents the tissue level of organization. This model is a kidney. We could also put a brain or a heart or a liver or a stomach, one of the organs of the body, which we will be going over in the near future. And so anytime you see one of the organs, if I ask you which level of organization does this model represent, you would simply say the organ level. You don't even have to tell me which organ it is, just say the organ level. Now organs come together to form organ systems, and this model represents an organ system. This is actually the urinary system. We see several organs: kidneys, ureters, bladder, urethra. Each organ has a different function, but when they work together like a small team to accomplish a higher function, then we call that an organ system. Now on a lab test, if I ask you, please identify the level of organization represented by this model, you would simply say the organ system, or organ system level. Okay? Now, the last model you see here is a person standing here. And this little individual represents an organism. All living things are organisms: dogs, cats, birds, bacteria. But for human anatomy and physiology, if I ask you what level of organization is represented by this model, you would simply say the organism level. Okay? So we have the 7 levels of organization represented here: chemical or molecular, the organelles, the cell, tissue, organ system, organism. On a lab test, you would see a picture of one of these particular models, and a question underneath it might say, please identify the level of organization represented by this model. There will be a blank, and you'll have to type in the correct answer. You do not get to use your list of things to know, so you better be able to rip them off the top of your head. And you have to type them in exactly as they're written here for the lab test. So start learning them exactly as they are on the list of things to know. And the one thing I would do if I were you is between molecular and cellular, I would squeeze in the organelle level because I include it, okay? All right, so listen, we're gonna move on to another video in a minute. Thanks for watching. I hope you had as much fun as I did. See you in the next video.